Welcome to the Thrive Show, where we offer you practical advice that can be implemented into your daily spiritual lives to help you build a thriving home and a thriving sphere. Thanks for joining us.
Well, hey there. Welcome to another episode of the Thrive Show. My name is Mike. So excited that you guys are joining us today. Real quick, from wherever you're at, if you're watching this on YouTube or if you're listening to this on your favorite podcast platform, feel free to smash that like button and subscribe. That'll not only allow you to see when we actually have more of these episodes that come out, but it kind of spreads our platform a little bit so that more people can thrive in your home and sphere, hopefully. So feel free to do that, and feel free to listen at the end of this episode. There will be a little thing that we'll have called the Thrive Deck, which is really cool. So feel free to hang around at the end of the episode and listen for that. And today I'm really excited about the topic that we're going to be talking about. We're going to be diving into personal worship and how that can help you thrive in your relationship between you and God, and maybe even between you and others. And I have a special guest today. I have Caleb Beyer here, and he is the worship pastor at one of the local churches here. So I'm not going to take up too much of his spotlight. I'm going to let you, Caleb, introduce yourself to our audience here and tell them a little about yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Caleb Beyer. I'm a worship pastor just down the street here, and known Mike for a couple years now, and just reached out. And I love worship, and so I appreciate you asking me to jump on, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, well, as I was saying, kind of before we got to the show, I need some expertise up here occasionally. So. Oh yeah. So, so if I guess we'll just dive right in, because there's really no other way to do it with this particular topic. So, we're talking about personal worship, and so if you were to define that, let's start off before we get to personal worship. Let's define what worship is.
Sure. Because
worship has been seen as so many things other than what it actually is sometimes. Yeah. So if you were to define worship, how would you define that?
Yeah, I would define worship as anything that points us to the majesty, the glory of God, and so whatever that may be, it could be getting out, taking a hike in creation, just kind of absorbing and appreciating just the beauty of creation. It could be listening to worship music. It could be sitting in solitude. Anything that allows us to focus in on the goodness and the greatness of God, I see as worship.
Yeah, and I see worship as kind of like the outpouring of what's happening on the inside of our hearts too. So a lot of, if we are recognizing God for who He is and everything that He's done around us, then that comes from within. So it's kind of the outpouring of what's happening on the inside, and just kind of I take worship sometimes as like obedience, right? It's like being obedient, because sometimes it can be really hard sometimes, like especially like us as worship pastors. We have to, every Sunday we're up there on stage and we're singing and we're leading people in songs and just different kinds of worship, and it's kind of, sometimes it's like, I'm not there, so I have to be obedient and know. And then it's sometimes in those are some of my better moments as a worship pastor, of leading people, of just feeling the presence of God even more. Yeah, just like those moments,
just like any thing, just like you look at marital relationships or relationships in general. Is you're not always going to feel it.
Yeah,
and so just taking a step forward in obedience, not because of how we're feeling in the moment, but because He's worthy of it. And so, I think that's great.
Yeah, I think that what you said it right there, because He's worthy of it. That's that's what it's about. So taking that all-encompassing kind of broad definition of what worship is, how do we define personal worship?
Yeah, I think you take all of that, that we just discussed, and you pull it out of the corporate setting. We as the American church, we do a really good job of kind of zeroing in on a style or a preference. And I think that corporate worship has kind of taken over the definition of worship in general. And so when we say the word worship, we think of gathering together with our church body and singing a few worship songs. And that is included in the definition, I would say.
Yes.
But it is not all encompassing by any means, like just like what we just talked about. And so I think about this in kind of in the same way that I think about the faith of a child, in the faith of parents. And there's a point in a child's life where I shouldn't say that. None of us know what's best for us. We like to think we do, and we like to think that we grow up and have more wisdom and better understanding. But the reality is that we don't know what's best for us. But that is extrapolated in the life of a child, and so just like good parents make decisions for their child and lead them towards Christ, there is a stopping point where we can't do it for them anymore. And just like we can't live out our children's faith for us, the church cannot live out the embodiment of our worship. And so relying on this time and this place to gather together and seeing that is the only way that I can worship. Like, the music's got to be right, and I've got to be, I want to be able to hear my own voice. I just want to be able to, the music's got to be loud, and so because we're all self-conscious, whatever.
We need to either play. Why aren't we playing this song? Because I connect so much. I worship so much through this song.
Right. And so I think that when we rely on structures to support our or to carry our faith and our worship, I think we're missing the mark there.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think kind of what you're kind of say, if I would to break it down into what it is that there are multiple types of worship, but even within those types of worship, you can be in two things can be in the same category kind of a thing. So there's corporate worship, and then there's personal worship.
Yeah.
And so what we're hitting on today is that personal worship, which is it's basically taking some of the things that we get to do on Sunday morning, such as sing worship songs or pray, then adding in some extra things with personal worship, as far as like going on a hike and enjoying the creation that God has given us, getting in silence and solitude, praying, seeking God, because you'll probably agree with me on this. Prayer is more than just us talking.
Right.
It's us going, okay, God, what do you want me to hear right now? And then sitting in silence sometimes. Yeah. And that can be the hardest thing for a lot of people, because I know myself, even when I'm just working in my office, sometimes I have background music on all the time. Yeah. So like sitting in silence and like that is worship, is taking time and going, God, you have my full undivided attention right now. I have everything off. All the lights are off. It's just me in this room and it's quiet. What do you want to hear? What do you want to tell me? Yeah. And so so there's personal worship is something that's, it's in its name. It's personal. It's something that we have to do. And I think one of the things you talked about there was that like worship pastors, worship leaders, we can only carry the mantle so far before they have to, our congregants or just people in general who are attending our worship services need to take that outside. And then that's kind of our job as worship pastors, is to equip them outside of the Sunday morning. And that's kind of the thing that the American church has done, has made such an emphasis on Sunday mornings, and such an emphasis on that's like, and if you look traditionally, even back in church history, you had to go to the temple to worship, right? So it's kind of this thing where, Jesus came and goes like, no, you are the temple. Like, you're the church body, the people are the church, not this building. So personal worship is a thing now. And so looking at it from the viewpoint of like, all right, now I have to what Brandon, our lead pastor, says a lot is you have to own your growth.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
like, that's kind of where people stop. Like, they're like, you're supposed to do this for me. And it's
Right.
not that.
Well, I mean, so often, at least the impression that I grew up with, and with many people that I know in ministry grew up with, was this kind of sense that, evangelism to your neighbor, all that included was, hey, come to church and the professionals will take over from there, which is crazy because we are all, each and every one of us, ministers of the faith. And
Yes.
and so this idea that we have all kind of supported over the last, I don't know, 50, 60 years in the American church, is that, all that it takes is, all you got to do is invite, get them here and we'll do the rest, and it's, we laugh at it, but it really is sad that we've allowed this ideology to become so pervasive in our culture that the thought of, like, oh no, this is my job too, is terrifying sometimes,
right.
and it's not. It's of course it's stepping out in faith, and I realize we're getting a little bit off the mark here, off the topic.
It's okay. It's all,
but I think it's all related.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so just like that, we have to own. Like you said, like Brandon said, we have to own our growth, and so if this isn't personal, if it's just something that we do, or just something that we come and join in on, once or twice a week, then what difference is it actually making in our lives? We know that God can work through anything and everything, but He also asks everything of us. He asks for our obedience, and so
and I think that's kind of what it comes down to, is that that obedience is what you're talking about, because there are people that take this consumeristic style of like, well, I'm coming to church, I'm consuming, I'm coming here to fill up my cup, right? Those and this, and especially in the American society, you do get people who are at a church and they're like, this isn't filling my cup, or they're asking too much of me, like, so I'm going to leave and go to another church, and or so you see a lot of that, especially in the American culture, but especially in the past, like you said, 50 to 60 years of just the invite, and that's enough. It's like, no, it's Jesus called us to make disciples, right? So like, it's so much more deeper and robust than just a simple invite to church or a Sunday morning. It's this all-encompassing relationship that we have with Jesus, and that's kind of where that personal relationship is. That if you don't have that piece, then like, you aren't going to come to corporate worship being prepared. You aren't going to be able to worship with your church family fully, because you don't have that full, all-encompassing relationship with Jesus outside of this building that we happen to call a church, when the church is actually the people within it. So, so what would you? So one of the main issues that people tend to have with personal worship is, like, they say, I don't have time. Right? I just don't have time to do that. Like, it sounds great, and I've maybe even implemented this into my day, but I always fail, and I never stick with it. So, or just I've never tried it because I know I have too much going on in my day, like, to even incorporate this. What would you say to that person? Like, how? I guess the question is, what would you tell the person who is listening to this, who says that, like, they don't have time to incorporate personal worship in their day?
So it's funny. I heard a story about this, not necessarily pertaining to personal worship, but somebody, a pastor, had basically given this idea of putting setting aside time for you fill in the blank, and a gentleman walked up after the service and said, it's all, it's well and good for you to say you're the pastor, it's your job, to do this stuff, But I own my own business, and I I barely have enough time in the day for anything. And the pastor pushed back on him a little bit and just said, well, I mean, I know that I always find time for things that matter to me. And so it sounded a little salty, but it's true.
Yeah.
That if there's something that we truly care about, we will always find time. And so there's no excuse in any way that could overcome that reasoning right there. That if something matters to you, you're gonna make time for it. And whether that if you like playing video games, you're gonna find time to do that. If you like eating good food, you're gonna find time to go out and find new restaurants. And if your personal faith matters and your desire to live out in obedience matters enough to you, you will make time for it. And this is I say this, I sound really, really confident in it, like I've never struggled with this, but I am just like anybody else. Yes. This is a lesson that has been hard learned for me. We specifically in the area of worship, when we actually just got done leading our church through a class on our midweek this last semester called family worship. And so we talked a lot about very similar kind of ideas in that class, and just how we should treat every one of our houses. We should see them as a little church, and we're the head of that church under Christ. And so if we are a church, then we should be worshiping. And so what a better way to live out and to instill what it looks like to live out faith in both before our children and to our spouses, and so it is it's something that when first kind of confronted with this idea, this was not something that was a part of my upbringing. This idea of family worship would have been for the weirdo hyper Christian.
That would have been for the homeschool kids. It's so true. Nothing against homeschool kids.
Ironically, we're homeschooling now. Yeah. we're the weird ones. But yeah, it's this idea was really daunting.
Yeah.
I had all these ideas in my head of what worship needed to look like based on our image of corporate worship, and so really, really wanted to like pump the brakes pretty quick, because I'm like, what am I getting myself into? Because I knew once I felt convicted about it, then I was stuck, and so I kind of tried to pump the brakes, and it didn't work, But what I discovered through this was that worship is so simple. It is not need to be complicated, and so just like that for our families, we can't give out of what we don't have, and we can't lead our families when we are empty. And so if we aren't seeking the Lord daily, both in Scripture and in prayer, but also in worship, then we're trying to do it on our own power. And what have we learned time and time again for for anybody who's been trying to follow Christ for any amount of time? Right. We can't do it on our own. And so basically the three things that I look at, and I don't know if I'm getting ahead of us or not, but the three elements that we look for, or that I strive to implement into both personal worship but also family worship, is the three simple practices of reading Scripture, praying, and singing. And so I love listening to worship music. But I can't call it worship unless I'm confessing what these songs are confessing as well out loud. Not just listening, in the car, but confessing it with my mouth. And so it's really simple. Those three things, and that is, that's straight out of Scripture. Too, so
it's pretty simple. That Scripture just says these are the things. And that's kind of the thing that like keeps standing out to me as I've grown in my faith, as I've as my spiritual roots, so to speak, have grown deeper. I've come to find that we have overcomplicated a very simple thing. Yeah. Same thing with discipleship. Same thing with everything involved with the church. Is God, like when Jesus was commissioning on the Great Commission, he was commissioning normal, everyday guys. Right. These weren't people who were trained. They actually were trained by Jesus, which is pretty awesome. So there's no better training than that. But before that, they were just normal guys. Right. And Jesus just said, "Come with me and let me show you how to do this." And then he empowered them to do it. And he said, "Teach others to do this too." Yeah. And that's pretty much what we're supposed to do. And we've made things super complicated. Like, oh well, if I'm doing family worship at home, then I have to make sure that my guitar is plugged into this, and then I have a guy on a cajon, and like we make this whole big event, and it's like, no, it's you open the Bible up, read a psalm, right? Pray for your family. If you guys have a song that you like to sing a song together. Like that's worship in itself. Like it's not any more complicated than that. Yeah. And there are times where you're not going to feel like doing it, and that's where the obedience side kind of comes into there. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the thing with just personal worship in general is people say that I just don't have time. Yeah. And so I think that's really good to say, like, if it matters to you, you'll find time. Right. I had a kind of more, maybe, I think yours might have been more equally blunt. We'll just call it that. Is that I would say, like, if you say that you don't have time, I'd say that you do have time. You're just not budgeting it well. Right. Because you budget things that matter to you. Right. And one of the things that so I did this. Okay, I'm terrible at math, so I had to use my calculator. But I did the old time budget thing, right? Sure. So you get it on the wall and you write, all right. So there's 24 hours. There's 7 days a week. You have 168 hours. So I'm gonna have to read this because but say you work a 40-hour a week job. All right, so that gets you to 128 hours. Say you're lucky enough to get 6 hours of sleep a night. I have 4 kids. I know you have some kids, so that doesn't always happen, but that's 42 hours a week. So minus that, you're looking at 86 hours. Say you go to church and you're involved in some sort of small group activity, give or take hour and a half each, 3 hours. So you're at 83 hours. If your commute's a half hour to work, 78 hours. So I've come anywhere from 70 to 78 hours in that range of time. Yeah. So that's basically 10 plus hours a day that you get to decide. Right. What am I going to do with my time? And the problem is that we fill up our time so much with ball games, with you name it. Right. We fill up our time so much with all of these things that we don't leave room for God. Mm-hmm. We don't, and then we, and that's kind of the thing that's like, when I look back at, the days that I feel like I've wasted, I'm like, dude, you could have woken up like 30 minutes earlier and done it. Or you could have just, this, for me, like I said, it is kind of easy sometimes when I'm like, I forgot to read my, what? Oh, I'm at work. I'm a pastor. I can read my Bible while I work. So that does help sometimes. It does. So not everybody has that perk, but there, it's figuring out, saying like, I'm going to set an alarm or something, or I'm going to, 15 minutes out of my day, like no matter what, when that alarm goes off, I stop everything I'm doing. And I'm, I think, emotional healthy spirituality, Peace Gazera, I don't know, but he calls it the daily office, right? Yeah. So like you set aside time every day, no matter what, and you stop what you're doing and you spend time with God, and that's your personal worship. So, but that kind of leads itself to like this consistency problem that admittedly I have, and you have it too. It's like, it's hard. Like, I know we're here on the other side of the camera and we're like, yeah, this is so easy. And it's like, it's not easy. Like what we're talking about is incredibly difficult. And this is what Caleb and I do for a living. Like we are worship pastors. So it's hard for us too. So we're not sitting here on some kind of high mountain looking down at you saying, I can't believe you can't do this, because I have failed at it, tried to fail at it many times. I'm sure you probably have a similar story to that too. So, but what has been one thing that has helped you to remain consistent with your personal worship?
Yeah. I think one of the best things that, and again, I have the cheat code of working at a church and can, at any moment just stop what I'm doing and open scripture. But I've always been someone who had to learn the hard way. And so it has not been, let me try to implement these, 3 principles into my life. And, I'm not a incredibly consistent person. And so, I have to work really hard at this. And admittedly, I often fail. And so, but that's the thing though, is that this isn't a graded test. This isn't something where, you fail and you fail. And I'm not trying to promote any idea of cheap grace per se, that, oh, God will forgive me, but his mercies are new every morning. And when I remember that and I zero in on that, I think that in and of itself is worship, and confessing and acknowledging that I'm not that great, and that he is good enough for me and for everybody else.
Well, that in a sense is like almost it's the purest form of worship, right?
Right.
I screwed up. I'm not good. You're good. You're better than me. You're good enough. I'm gonna fix my eyes on you or something. Like that's
Yeah. So I mean, to answer the question, I honestly don't have any tip that's like this is what did it for me. I don't have that thing. I just I have a short memory. And I often need to be reminded of just how great he is, and it's in those moments when I am reminded, and by his grace he does remind me, and so it's in those moments where I just have to just stop and confess, like, God, I messed this up, and it's a good thing that I have you, because I need you. And
well, and a lot of times, like I've found that, when I wouldn't know for sure because I'm not God, but a lot of times God is more interested in where our heart's posture is at, as opposed to like
the things that we do.
Our actions.
Right.
Our actions matter, but at the end of the day, it's like we are human. We are imperfect. We are living in an imperfect world.
Right.
So the fact that we expect perfection is already a flawed system. Yeah. And so like that reminder to yourself, like maybe that's what you need to do, is remind yourself every day, like, God, God's mercies are new every morning. Like his grace is sufficient, like on my life. That doesn't mean that we should try to sin more, because, even though, but what it does mean is that there are times where we are going to mess up. And that's okay. Like it's what we do after that matters the most.
It's our response.
Yeah.
And ironically, it's those moments where, that drives me to worship, because it's that reminder that, it just gets me there. I'm like, oh man, he is so good.
I think that, I don't know if that's a toxic male quality or something, but we need something to slap us right in the face to be like, oh man. But similar things happen to me all the time. Obviously I have grown from a lot of those things, but a lot of it comes from just that personal worship time of I'm firm in my foundation, which is my personal worship, whether that be scripture reading, praying, singing along in the car to a worship song, and just so we can get this out of the way. I love Caleb, and I think Caleb is great, but I just want to positively encourage you to dive deeper. Like those songs are great, but for me, worship is all about like, where is the finger pointed? Mm-hmm. And it's okay to have the finger pointed at me. That's okay sometimes, because of what God has done for me. But I just like search out songs where the finger is pointed to God, because like that in itself will give you a more of a robust understanding of what true worship is. Right. So like if you have Spotify or Apple Music, or I think Google has their own platform or whatever it is, like search top 100 worship songs and just listen to those. Like I guarantee you at least 25% of them are going to be pointing the finger to God. So probably that might be a exaggerated figure, but just when we're talking about worship is the outpouring of what happens in our heart towards God. And so, yes, we learn a lot of that from the experiences that we have with God and around us and the things that God has done for us. But we also need to recognize who God is. And I think that can be maybe the missing piece of your worship repertoire, so to speak. So, and if I don't, like, I'm just as terrible at this as probably the next person, but like, I'm a very structured person. So if I get out of my structure is when things start going haywire. Yeah. I'm getting ready to go on vacation, and like, it's going to just throw everything to the fire, and I'm about to try to figure out how to live again after that. But one of the main structures I have is like the first thing I do in the morning is I read scripture. I have like a Bible plan that I read, and every now and then I'll actually journal through it. I have a memory scripture and everything. So like I have a very set time where I am solely focusing on God, and it doesn't always require sound. It doesn't always require reading. Sometimes it's just sitting there. But I have a time very specifically, for me, it's as soon as I get into the office. But for you, if you don't have the vocation of worship pastor where you're full-time doing this, maybe that's when you wake up in the morning, get your coffee ready and just go sit down in a quiet spot. It's hard sometimes to find that. I know I have kids, you have kids, and there's not a lot of quietness that happens at my house. Yeah. So it requires, sometimes worship requires sacrifice. Right. And that's kind of where that obedience.
Yeah. But like you were saying though, I think figuring out what works for you, there's no, cut and dry, thing or principle that is going to make it, I do this and I will achieve success in this. For me, I can't wait until the office because the minute I get in the office, there's things that I'm responsible for and things that I have to do. And so it has to happen before I get to church in order for me to be consistent and disciplined in that. Because the second I step into my office, I'm so easily distracted by the things that I have to do. So yeah, for me, it just looks a little bit different, and that's
okay.
Yeah, it's great.
And that's the thing. It might look different for you at home. It probably will, and that's okay. So the point is that we're trying to find that. We're trying to find that time.
Yeah, and I think the practice of being intentional in trying to figure that out is in itself an act of obedience, and deciding that this is important enough to me to try and figure it out, trying to figure out what works, and so
absolutely, yeah, that's great, man. Well, I really appreciate you coming on to the show and your wisdom and advice and everything. I think it's gonna hopefully whoever's listening to this, that you were blessed by it. I know I was blessed by it. So, but thank you guys for joining us for another episode of the Thrive Show, and we will see you next time.
See you later.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Thrive Show. Our vision at the First Church of Christ is to build thriving homes and thriving spheres, and that can only happen with a thriving relationship with our God. Now, if you want a fun and interactive way to get your household thriving in all those areas, you're definitely going to want to check out this new game that we've created. It's called the Thrive Deck, and it's available now. To play the game, simply draw a card from the deck once a week and do whatever the challenge says. If the challenge doesn't apply to your household, do the option instead. And if the challenge isn't quite challenging enough, then you have a bonus option you could do as well. Each card has a designated challenge based on one of 3 different categories. One focuses on your home. These challenges are designed to help you thrive in your household, whether you live alone or with a spouse or with children. Another category emphasizes your relationship with God by offering new ways to encourage growth in your personal spiritual life. The last category prioritizes your relationships within your personal spheres of influence. These cards might challenge you to step out of your comfort zone with friends, coworkers, or acquaintances and help you all thrive in your relationship with God. So are you up for the challenge? Visit the FCC Welcome Center to purchase yours and keep thriving in your homes and in your spheres.